Hi everyone, this is Josh Nelson at Keystone Financial Services. We're about to get started here in just a few minutes, but welcome. Glad that you're able to make it today. I've got myself here and also Jeremy Bush, another wealth advisor at my office. So we're here to be able to educate you on financial planning stuff, whether it be in our one-on-one meetings or in our educational presentations. That's one thing that we always focus on is making good decisions, and oftentimes we do that by having some logic, having lots of information, and hopefully some wisdom too, right? Some people that have come before us. And that's the one benefit that you will get today as part of my talk is that not only am I a licensed financial advisor with 20 years of experience, certified financial planner, master's degree in personal financial planning, right? Lots of background, thousands of meetings with clients. But unfortunately, I've also been through a divorce. And so I can actually speak to this stuff in that not only have I helped people through it, but I've done it myself as well. So we're going to get started here in about 3 minutes, right at the noon hour. As always, a lot of the attendees that listen to this don't watch it live. So we've got a few people that'll be popping on the live presentation. So certainly ask us questions along the way. Make sure that you locate the questions box and also the chat box as you'll be able to interact with us. That's a big benefit of being on live. But we always record these, so they will be on our YouTube channel, which you can locate by going to keystonefinancial.com, and also certainly direct anybody else there as well that should be listening to this or needs to hear this information. So again, we're going to get started here in about 2 minutes. We'll start on time, we'll end on time. We've got scheduled for an hour today, and certainly any follow-up questions, we will leave some time at the end if need be. So we'll give people another couple of minutes here. Again, for those of you who are tuning in right now, if you could locate the questions box in the chat box, that's a way to communicate with Jeremy and I, and we'll be able to answer your questions along the way. So if I don't notice them, Jeremy will, and he'll bug me and say, hey, make sure you stop and cover this. Of course, if we get too many questions, we have to just kind of move on, because I know a lot of people are also tuning in on their lunch hour, and I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. I know there's a lot of other things that you've got to do personally and professionally, and you may be dialing in at your desk eating lunch. In fact, the funny thing is that that's how I started as an advisor. In the early years, we were on the HB campus, on Hewlett-Packard campus, and oftentimes we would give brown bag presentations for the employees on various financial education topics. So this is not a unfamiliar territory for me. Now we just get to do it on a virtual basis as well. And the cool thing about that is that we've got people all over the country right now, not only clients that live in other areas, but we also have people traveling all the time too, right? We've also got people that live right down the road and they don't have much time, right? Because they might just be in between conference calls or something like that. So as we come up on the noon hour here, one thing to note is this is being recorded, so you can certainly pass this on later on. We usually will have the recorded version all ready to go later today. We'll post it on the YouTube channel. So if you can think of things that you want us to cover, certainly let us know right now, but also certainly pass on the recorded presentation to others that should be listening to it either now or in the future. So I just saw the clock hit noon, and that means that we're going to get started. We're going to cover divorce planning today, and sometimes people hear that topic and they kind of give me flack for it and say, what, you're helping people plan their divorce or plan to get divorced? No, that's not what we're doing here. We're talking about people who have already made the decision to get divorced, or maybe the decision was made by somebody else and they find themselves in that circumstance. So the important thing is to understand how to navigate that territory and get educated, because a lot of times what you don't know can really, really hurt you. And I can tell you that from experience. I can also tell you from many, many people I've talked to that have been through divorce, a lot of stuff that they wish they would have known before. So that's a lot of what we'll talk about today, at least the financial planning impacts on things. Now, of course, it's a whole other webinar as far as, well, how do you get kids through it? If you've got kids that, whether they're adult kids or kids that are still at home, how do you get through that part of it? Or how do you get through the emotional impact of going through a divorce? That's not for today. We're just going to cover the financial topics, and maybe that'll be a different webinar that we cover those other areas, because I can speak from experience on both of those as well. So I'm going to turn myself off on the webcam right now and basically just have the slides up here for a bit. But if anybody has questions, again, please ask in the questions box or the chat box. One other thing to keep in mind is we do have a handout section And we always try to throw some information in there that could be helpful. One thing that will be really, really relevant, especially for somebody who's going through divorce or might find themselves going towards a divorce situation, is our tax planning guide or financial guide 2019 in the handout section. That's a free PDF. You can go ahead and grab that while we're on the presentation, and you can also certainly pass it on to anybody else that you would think that would be helpful for, not only because it covers a lot of tax stuff, but it covers a lot of other financial information with regard to different types of benefits, Social Security, Medicare, health savings accounts, things like that, a lot of limits and things that could be really, really relevant to you, especially as you get close to the end of the year and planning for tax season coming up. So there's no question that divorce is one of the most stressful things, and I knew kind of secondhand from people telling me that it was stressful. I can tell you that it is one of the most stressful things that you could ever go through in your life. So not to make light of that at all. Today we're going to cover the financial planning impacts of divorce, and the trick is a lot of times when we make emotional decisions with regard to money, they don't go well. They kind of go a different direction from what you really would want. But of course, divorce is a very emotional thing, and as people are going through that, they might find themselves feeling like they're in a war zone. And in the midst of a war zone, you might not be thinking clearly, and that's where it's even more important, I think, that you've got professionals. You've got a team that you pulled together that can help you and make sure that you are fully educated on how to get through things. All right. Bear with me for a second. See if I can advance my slide. There we go. So this is my non-tech savvy side of me. This is me, Josh Nelson. I'm a financial planner, certified financial planner. Big difference. CFP program is one that covers very in depth all the different financial planning areas. I've been through that program. Jeremy is going through that program right now. And one thing that we can tell you is that it's not something that comes out of a cereal box. It's pretty in-depth knowledge and training with regard to financial planning. It would almost be like going to a surgeon that's board certified versus one that's not board certified. Well, they're both MDs, right? So they both have made it through medical school. But if you're going under the knife, would it be good to have somebody who is board certified versus not? Yeah, probably. They've had to go through a lot more with regard to education and experience. So today we're going to be talking about building a qualified divorce team. In other words, who are the players? Who are the people that somebody would need? And one thing to keep in mind is I know that when you're tuning into this may not even be you, right? You might be planning for a family member. You might just know people that have gone through divorce and really could use this information. So obviously we're keeping this educational today. Feel free to pass it on to anybody that would need the information, as well as people that would want to talk to us and run some things past us. So how can financial advisors help during the divorce and then taking control of your future as far as how to get through this, how to plan financially? So with regard to assembling your team, typically everybody just thinks, well, you have to have an attorney, right? Well, you don't have to necessarily, but unless you're in a really, really agreeable situation and everything is completely transparent, it's more often the case that somebody needs representation. And, one thing I can tell you from experience too is that there's a lot of things that you wouldn't expect that end up happening. And especially somebody that maybe you trusted at one point, you think, well, they wouldn't do that, or, they wouldn't do this, they wouldn't use that strategy, they wouldn't hide money, whatever it would be. I can tell you that it happens. It still happens. And a lot of times they may be influenced by other people too. It could be family members. It could be that they have an attorney, and stuff that you would never have thought that they would have done on their own, they may do, right? They may play that card. And so it's really important that you're advocating for yourself and having an attorney to be able to watch out for your back and know, hey, here are the implications, not just from a decision that you're thinking about, but also what are the second order consequences? In other words, what are the things that could result from doing this or that, or somebody else doing this or that? Obviously, that's their job, right? And sometimes attorneys get a bad reputation, but it's important to hire somebody. If you're going to get an attorney, my advice is get one that is not going to be your friend. That's certainly not going to be beneficial for you. You want somebody who's going to be advocating for you, and sometimes we'll tell you some hard truths, right, that you may not want to hear, but maybe you need to. Maybe you need to, as far as things that you're thinking about, or things that maybe somebody else might be doing in the background. So, certainly attorneys. Second category would be financial planners or wealth advisors. Now, of course, a lot of times here we've got some confusion about roles and titles. And so it's important to think about who is it that I'm actually talking to here. So you do want to make sure that it's a financial planner, somebody who's really versed in all areas of finance, not just investments. I would say the vast majority of people that have the job title wealth advisor, financial advisor, investment advisor, they're probably an investment advisor. They're probably just giving you advice with regard to your assets, maybe your investments, but they might not be looking at all areas of finance with regard to taxes and estate planning and Medicare and Social Security, all kinds of other stuff that would impact your finances. My strong recommendation is that you would hire a financial planner, ideally a certified financial planner, because they'll certainly be well versed and probably very experienced in helping people get through divorce situations. And then finally, therapists or divorce counselors, psychologists, whatever job title you want to attribute to them, basically it's somebody who can help you with the emotional side of going through a divorce. And I can tell you, all the stages of grief, we probably have heard that before, but you'll probably go through them, or your family member, whoever's going through this is going to go through them, and it may not be just a clean, quick thing, right? It may kind of go in phases. So I certainly went to a counselor during the divorce process. I found it really helpful to be able to process it. And maybe they weren't talking about the financial stuff, right? But having that person that you're able to process the emotional stuff, especially if you've got kids, then that totally changes the game, because they're also relying on you to be able to get through this and to be able to get through in a healthy way, as possible. Of course, going through a divorce, I think it should be said too, is that nobody plans on that, right? I don't think anybody goes into a marriage thinking, well, someday we're going to get divorced or something like that. That's pretty callous to say that. I don't think that's the case. Most people think that things are going to be great forever, but then, stuff happens, things change, and that's not saying that divorce is good or bad or indifferent. Obviously it's bad. It's a tough situation that people are going through, and it may not even be something that you did, or maybe you don't feel like you're at fault, but you still might find yourself going through the situation and still having to go through the same stuff, as far as helping kids, getting yourself through it, and certainly the financial impact of things. So do I need my own financial advisor? That question comes up sometimes, because oftentimes, and we recommend, of course, is that if you are married, that you're probably planning your life together, right? You're planning your future together. And so having a financial planner, ideally again a certified financial planner, in the process, helping you make good financial decisions, good investment decisions, good life decisions with regard to your future planning. Of course, the two of you have probably relied on them greatly. If you haven't had an advisor or a financial planner in the past, then you may have been doing it on your own. And the really important thing there is that you want to be working with a fiduciary. And the fiduciary, what that means is that they've got a legal obligation to give you advice that's in your best interest. So what happens when people split up? What happens when people are separated and making different financial decisions and going different directions, or headed toward divorce? Well, all of a sudden, you've got a fiduciary that possibly may be conflicted, right? Now they've got two different people with two different agendas that may need different types of advice. You might want to get your own financial advisor, your own financial planner, and split that relationship, at least for the time being. Even in a separation situation, I'd recommend that you're talking to your own person. We find that oftentimes people, even in a financial planning situation, will find that people will either play one of two roles. Either they'll be the interested spouse, the one that's really interested in the money and the planning and the investing. They're usually the ones that are more organized and will be kind of the lead on things. So one thing that I recommend is that if you're not that spouse, I would definitely recommend that you get a different advisor and that you get up to speed very, very quickly, because what you don't know could hurt you very badly, especially if somebody was trying to hide money or hide income or something like that. That's one reason why even in a really healthy marriage, is it's important that, at least on a high level standpoint, that both spouses know what's going on. They know where the money is. They know, what the plan is, certainly what the long-term financial plan is. So having an advisor that's working in your best interest, and of course we'd say the same thing about a CPA or an estate attorney or a divorce attorney, is that you want somebody who's advocating for you and is watching out for your best interest and will tell you the truth. They'll tell you the truth even if you don't want to hear it. That, I think, is an absolute must when it comes to hiring any of these professionals, is you want somebody who's not just going to tell you what you want to hear. So so do I need my own financial advisor? Yeah, there could be split loyalties. Hiring your own advisor will also help you in the future if you do end up going through the entire divorce process. Of course, then you're left in a new financial situation with maybe new living arrangements, new financial arrangements. Certainly, it doesn't matter how much money you've got, whether you've got millions or nothing, there's still going to be a financial impact on a divorce. So they'll also be able to help you with your future as you get through it and now are dealing with that new situation. You still have a new financial plan, right? You've got a new circumstance that you need to be able to deal with and plan for your own future apart from that ex-spouse. So how can a financial advisor help? Well, first of all, they can help you figure out your current needs, right? Help you figure out your cash flow, because oftentimes divorce can be very, very stressful financially, and people are just trying to figure out, how do we pay the bills, right? So taking a look at the current income situation, current cash flow, certainly trying to figure out on both sides, both with the opposing party and yourself, your soon-to-be ex-spouse and yourself. You want to figure out where all the income and assets are. So not only you can plan for current stuff to make sure that you're going to be okay and there's no massive hits that you end up taking. Certainly, it's a time when a lot of times people's credit gets wrecked. Credit history is like your financial reputation. So you want to make sure that you're not missing payments, you're not making late payments, you don't have debts that go to collections. Certainly, a lot of divorce situations, people actually end up going bankrupt, and we certainly don't want that, because that can take a long time to repair and dig out of. You want to make sure that you understand the complete situation. Creating financial statements, really important. Making a balance sheet for you personally and what you think that is out there for the marital assets, as well as the income, the taxes, all that stuff. You want to be going through and gain a really clear idea of what things are today before you start planning for the future. So 3 stages of the divorce financial planning. And by the way, there's a certification for this even. There's actually a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Advisor, and sometimes people will even go to somebody with that designation. We've been kind of looking at that one. A lot of that is covered during the Certified Financial Planner course, but it's something that is kind of a specialty. It's one that you want somebody who's either been through it themselves, or you want somebody who has had a lot of training in that area, because it is a specialty. One advantage here at Keystone is that we actually have a wealth enhancement group that we're able to tap into, not just our own immediate team here locally, but we've got a team of CPAs, CFAs, estate attorneys, other people that we can pull in those areas that we may need some extra expertise. So certainly use us as a resource for that. So when it comes to the divorce planning process, well, there's 3 stages, right? There's the before the divorce, during the divorce, and after the divorce. And each one of those stages does have its own unique characteristics. So we're going to dig into that now. Before the divorce, certainly getting really educated, and again, this may not be your thing. If you're the spouse that maybe hasn't been as engaged, maybe you weren't really interested in a lot of it, and you were just trusting your spouse to kind of handle things, so that's fine, but you need to be the one who takes the reins now on your own financial situation and get up to speed as quickly as possible. Is it possible that somebody would take advantage of you during the divorce process, with regard to hiding money or maybe doing stuff that would be to their own advantage and not yours? Absolutely. Could they be getting legal advice or advice from family or other people to do stuff that they normally wouldn't do that hurts you? Yes, they would. So it's really important to recognize that the marriage the way that it was, that may have significantly changed, and you really need to be looking out for yourself and have people that can help you with that, certainly as you're going through the process. So one thing to really think about with regard to that, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. There we go. And my computer starts falling asleep on me. Well, you guys probably saw some interesting flashes there. But with regard to what that means before the divorce, then is getting really organized, identifying your financial documents, getting all the data together as quickly as possible. Now, if the living arrangements have changed, you might find that challenging. You might find that you were the spouse that moved out, and maybe all the financial records are still in the marital home, right? So it could be difficult to get some of that and pulling that together. Hopefully it's in some type of a digital format and you can still get access to it. But before the divorce is definitely the time to do that, because you might find that you are the person who's gotten cut off of a lot of that, and it may be very difficult to get that information short of some type of a court order. So one thing to think about there is certainly that one thing to think about is that you certainly would want to be able to download that in advance before anybody has filed or talked about speaking to an attorney, anything like that. And then, certainly anticipating any mistakes, anything that especially your legal experts, your financial experts could share with you as far as mistakes that other people could have made in the past that you can avoid. So during the divorce, certainly they can work with your divorce attorneys. That's the role of an advisor during that time too. You have a team. In other words, I definitely wouldn't silo people where everybody is, kind of dealing with everything separately. I would definitely get people together if possible. You might even have some joint meetings where you might meet with your attorney and CPA and financial advisor. They might all be on one call, or they might be all in one meeting room. That wouldn't be a bad idea, because oftentimes these different professionals have their own specialties, and they may only cover one area and not think of a different one. So I can tell you for myself, there were many of those calls where I had my attorney and my CPA on the call with me at the same time, kind of working through stuff and answering questions, because the attorney oftentimes didn't know the answers or know certain records or how things were to be treated. So sorry if you're getting some flashing, by the way, on your end. I'm getting my screen flashing here, so hopefully nobody's gotten cut off. But certainly, as we're going through the financial and tax implications, tax returns, we can give you a list of financial documents, by the way. We don't have it on the screen today, but we can actually give you a list of our important financial documents that you should be pulling together anyway, right? You should kind of have access to that stuff at any time when things are good. But certainly, if you think that you could be going through a divorce, you'd want to pull that stuff together very quickly and keep it in a safe location. And then, again, forecasting the long-term benefits and effects of any decisions that you're making, because more than likely you are going to hit some decision points where you need to decide if you're going to settle or not. You need to decide what it is that you want, and having the expert advice in that process will be really important. And then after a divorce, of course, is that your professionals will be able to help you move stuff, right? Things will necessarily, right, if you have stuff, whether it be accounts, real estate, personal property, all that stuff, of course, will get split out in some type of fashion. Now, with regard to how it gets split, I know people are dialing in from all over the country right now and could be listening to this on webinar format. So, keep in mind, every state, every jurisdiction is going to be treated a little bit differently. So we're not going to get into exact stuff as far as, well, in this state, here's how they treat the marital home or income or anything like that, because it does get treated very, very differently based on the state. Sometimes it can get treated very differently even on the county where the divorce is filed, as far as even certain judges and how things can be looked at. So really important to understand basically the implications of things, and then be able to actually transition those assets and start to split those out. So certainly your estate planning will change, because more than likely your spouse was probably the beneficiary. They were probably your power of attorney. That's assuming you had your estate planning documents done, right? Well, if you don't, you have got plenty of company. There's about 70% of the population that does not have their estate documents done. So if you don't have estate documents, that would be things like your wills, trusts, powers of attorney. If you don't have those at this point, now would definitely be the time to get your house in order. If you did have those things, of course, you'd want to be going back through and updating all of them after the divorce. One thing I can tell you, and this is not legal advice, of course, I'm not an attorney, but one thing that I found was that during the actual divorce itself, after the divorce was filed, there's very little that can be changed without having the consent of the other party. In other words, having things like changing your beneficiaries or making changes to your investments even. Pretty much that stuff went under lockdown, and again, even making changes to investments inside accounts, things like that, those were kind of on lockdown, and it was frustrating, right? Because even things like making adjustments to retirement accounts, things like that, that really wouldn't even impact the other party. It was just maybe a move. Well, I wanted to move from this fund to that fund or that investment to this investment. Oftentimes that can't be done until after the divorce is finalized. So updating beneficiary designations, of course, all of that stuff with regard to the estate documents, beneficiary designations, those things are really important to update because you don't necessarily want all that stuff going to an ex-spouse, right, after a divorce. And it depends on your state. Some states like Colorado actually have some automatic defaults. So even if you had named an ex-spouse, it's just the law kind of assumes that you wouldn't have wanted to continue having them as your beneficiary. But that's not always the case. I've heard of case studies in other jurisdictions where people have kept and maybe forgotten that they named somebody on their life insurance policy. Well, I can tell you that the insurance company is going to look at what's on your form, right? They don't care the fact that you went through a divorce unless the law tells them to. They're going to be paying it out to the person on that form. That could be awkward, right? If you had if you left something to an ex-spouse and you ended up disinheriting a new spouse or kids or something like that. So very important to go through all this stuff in great detail. Certainly taking a look at the new budget, the new financial plan. You've got a new set of circumstances with regard to living arrangements, with regard to income, with regard to taxes, with regard to assets, retirement funds, all that stuff gets impacted, of course, in the divorce. So taking a look at the new circumstances, now that you know how things got finalized, whether you agree with them or not, you probably don't, by the way. I think most people probably are not happy with the outcome of a divorce because necessarily that's part of the process, right, is that everybody gets financially hurt. And hopefully you can get through it, in something that at least you can live with, right? Regardless of what it is, though, you do have a new financial situation and one to plan for. Oftentimes, people are playing catch up. It may be that somebody is really having to gear up and make much larger contributions towards paying down debt or putting money into college funds or putting money into retirement funds. So oftentimes it is a setback. Financially, it's a setback from what people were planning on before. And so it's even more important to double down on, to be able to double down on the circumstances. So yeah, again, sorry if we've got some technical difficulties. I'm seeing on here is audio restored, video restored. We've never had that happen before, so we'll have to troubleshoot that in the future. But if this is a really bad recording, by the way, I promise I'll just re-record it privately and post it as well. So just keep that in mind. If you're hoping that other people are able to listen to this, we'll make sure that there's a clean copy out there. All right, and then some common mistakes. There's 6 common mistakes, and this is not just from me, but from other professionals as well, talking to attorneys, CPAs, other advisors, people who have been through a divorce. These are ones that you really, really want to watch out for, the most common ones. Number 1 is waiting to get advice. Now, I mentioned before, sometimes people think, and sometimes this actually happens, right? Sometimes people are extremely cooperative and it's an amicable divorce and maybe nobody is really happy, but people just want the best for each other and they move on and do things in a fair way. Unfortunately, that oftentimes does not happen, and sometimes people think that's what's going to happen, but it doesn't. And that's really, really important to recognize, is that you need to be watching out for yourself and have people that are watching out for you. And you can still hope for the best, right? You still could end up with an amicable situation. You still could be very cooperative. In some circumstances, people get divorced and they still remain friends, believe it or not. There actually is still some level of connection and friendship, but oftentimes that's not the case. and you need to kind of be watching your back with regard to making sure that that you're not getting somehow bamboozled on the back end with somebody who's maybe appearing to be cooperative and then they're not. So don't wait to get financial advice, certainly legal advice, tax advice. This is the time to pull together your team. And if it turns out that things are marching forward and everybody's very cooperative, that's great. But if things don't go the way that you want them to, you don't want to be playing catch up. You don't want to be coming in after the fact and having, maybe a whole team on the other side has been working against you. That oftentimes is what happens, and people end up really getting disadvantaged if that's what they end up experiencing. Mistake number 2, failing to educate yourself. Again, this is a really important time. If you are not somebody who feels like they're financially educated, or maybe just not as financially educated as you'd like to be, now's the time. And again, the difficult part about all of this, of course, is it's very emotional, and there could be kids involved, and you still have a career and all kinds of stuff, right? But now is not the time to let off. It's certainly not something to back burner with regard to keeping yourself educated. So not only is it important to understand where you are financially, but also understand how the rules work. Because by not knowing the rules, you could end up making some decisions that have very different impacts than what you thought were going to happen. And certainly in the divorce process, as assets and income are being considered, you want to make sure that you've got people that can be watching your back and helping you see things that you don't see. And oftentimes that's why we make mistakes, is because we don't see the bus coming, right? We don't see the situation coming, and we end up making a bad decision or not maybe acting in a situation where we should have. So very important to educate yourself. One thing that I would recommend, certainly you can poke around our website, keystonefinancial.com, but there are all kinds of good resources out there with regard to financial planning. One that I would point you to certainly would be go to the Financial Planning Association. There's a great website that has a consumer education part of it, all kinds of free resources there. I hesitated towards sending you to Google or YouTube because you can get a whole variety of different things there, and not all of it's good. There could be a lot of stuff that ends up contradicting itself. So that's why Jeremy and I still have jobs right as financial advisors, because there's almost too much information, there's too much advice out there, and a lot of times it is contradicting itself. So a couple of people that I do respect, though, as far as authors, Rick Edelman. There's a book called The Truth About Money. Rick Edelman is Rick, R-I-C, last name Edelman, E-D-E-L-M-A-N. So again, Rick Edelman. My favorite book that he's written is called The Truth About Money. And you can easily find that on Amazon or just by dropping by Barnes & Noble. So check out his book, The Truth About Money. It's a very easy read, and it's more of a resource book where you're able to pull up certain areas as you need them. Another one that I find helpful is David Bach. Has written a number of books, but a couple of them that I like, one of them is The Latte Factor, I think is his newest one. So he covers a lot of good stuff with regard to financial planning. Another one, if you're a woman, and even if you're a man, you'd probably get benefit from it, but Smart Women Finish Rich is another one that he has written that's great, and also The Automatic Millionaire. So I'm a David Bach fan. He's written a lot of good stuff and very easy to digest, and in very bite-sized formats in times where you may be limited. And of course, you can get all of those in audiobooks as well. If you find yourself in a big debt situation, anything by Dave Ramsey, of course, going to Financial Peace University, or the Total Money Makeover book that he's written. Of course, he's got a radio show and YouTube stuff. So he does a lot of really, really good stuff and has a lot of good material on handling debt and handling bills and budgeting and so forth. So again, now's the time to double down on this. If you're not where you want to be financially, after the divorce, it's probably even worse. And so it's not a time to let off on this. Be one of the people that is the exception that really turns things around. And this could be the catalyst for you to turn your entire financial situation around, end up in a much better place over time than you might have been in the first place. Mistake number 3, refusing to communicate. Now, of course, divorce could be a very emotional thing, and I can't imagine somebody would say it's not, right? I think anybody that's gone through a divorce will tell you that it's extremely emotional no matter what the circumstances are, but it's really, really important to communicate. So it does require some emotional maturity. I can tell you that, in that there is going to be some level of hurt, no matter what the circumstances. There's going to be some level of hurt. There can be a temptation to lash out. So it's really important not only that you're communicating well and clearly, but that you're getting advice on that communication, and having somebody else look it over. Might also be a good idea to wait 24 hours. If there's a message that you're looking at sending, maybe think through it, maybe talk to other people and understand what it is that you're communicating, because of course anything that you're putting in writing especially could end up in a courtroom someday, and could work against you, right? If it's some kind of emotional diatribe on somebody, it could come up, right, and it could be used against you. And it's one of those things. Again, we don't want to bust on attorneys. They can be useful people, but they can also be used to attack you. So recognize that there is another side, not just the people working for you, but there's a whole other team on the other side that could be working to, of course, to that other person's advantage, which could mean attacking you. And oftentimes it may not be fair. It may not seem fair, but it may be something that you're the target of it anyway. Also, going through and making sure that you're budgeting for two households now, not forgetting that in most circumstances, when people are going through a separation or divorce, there's now two households. Some people do the, stay in one place, and I suppose that would help budget-wise, but oftentimes may not work from a practical standpoint. So recognizing that budgeting for two households is going to be somewhat expensive, right? Now you're talking about two payments on something, either two rents or two house payments. Also think about the stuff. You've got a bunch of stuff that costs money, right? Furniture, appliances, things like that. Even things like toys, right? New clothing for kids possibly to have at two households. So thinking through all of that and recognizing that at least for a season, there's probably going to be a big disruption in your cash flow, and extra dollars are going to have to be allocated to be able to maintain those two households, especially during the divorce, right? Before everything is finalized, there still has to be some planning for that. And certainly we don't want to see somebody's financial situation get wrecked in the midst of that, like wrecking your credit history or not paying bills and things like that. That's one other thing to kind of watch out for, of course, as you're forming two households, is the fact that now that you probably have multiple utility bills and multiple, property tax things, other stuff like that, multiple insurance policies. So be really careful about that to make sure that if you're financially responsible for those bills, that you're still getting those either electronically or mailed to your new address if you're the person who moved, because you could be held responsible for that, and there could be bad debt, things like that that you weren't even aware of. And then after the fact, you're going back and trying to correct your credit or repair things, which can take some time. So, and unfortunately, even if it's a divorce situation and, well, it's not my fault, I didn't get the bill, they probably don't care, frankly. They're probably going to be dinging you on your credit or possibly even sending it to collections. So be really, really cognizant of all the bills that were there before and make sure that they're being covered by someone. Mistake number 5, assuming that a 50-50 division of property is equitable or even possible. In some circumstances, that's not what happens. In a lot of cases, it seems like, well, this should be pretty simple, right? It should just be a simple division, but then the reality of, hey, there's property involved, or there's a business involved, or maybe even there was some inheritance that was received, and people are saying, well, that's not really fair. That was an inheritance received from a loved one, but we put it in the joint account, things like that. That's where the attorneys can get involved, of course, and CPAs, getting your financial team together to help you understand where everything is, how everything is titled, how are all these assets going to be dealt with, because things can get, especially if they end up going through court, things can get pretty wild and crazy with regard to trying to collect information. So the sooner you can get on top of this, the better. Not only for getting you through the divorce process itself, but also remember that all this stuff has implications after the divorce with your own financial planning. So getting as organized as possible is really important. So keep in mind, depending on what your circumstances are, it may not be a good idea to assume. It may be a good idea to ask lots of questions and also look at any other types of agreements that might have been in place. For example, any premarital or prenuptial agreements, even postmarital agreements, sometimes those are there, and that could impact things. Inheritances, again, if somebody owns a business, or if husband and wife owned a business, or maybe there's multiple businesses, multiple pieces of property, and then certainly any spousal maintenance, alimony obligations, child support, all of those will have implications, and it may not be what you think it's going to be. There's certain stuff that's just kind of done there by statute, by law, and so it could just be a formula, but oftentimes the court, or if you're just settling, right, if you're coming up with an agreement, it may not be what you thought it would be. It may be a little bit different. So keep that in mind, is not assuming anything. And then mistake number 6, agreeing too quickly to a proposed financial agreement. So I can tell you that divorce is not fun. It's emotionally really tough. And of course, people are also thinking about their kids. If you've got kids at home especially, they're thinking about, hey, we want to get through this as quickly as possible. It's very emotional and taking a lot of time, and it's creating a lot of conflict. So the sooner the better we can get through this thing. So it's possible, again, in some circumstances, people can be extremely cooperative and fair and so forth, but in a lot of cases, that's not going to happen. I would just throw that out to you, that agreeing too quickly to some type of agreement might not only, it may put you at a disadvantage because you haven't really had time to get the proper advice to see if that's really a good thing for you or not at that point, but also one of the benefits of kind of going through the discovery process of all the financial assets and everything is that it gives you more time to uncover things. Now, of course, we would hope, in a perfect world, we would hope that nobody would hide money or income or anything like that, but it does happen. It does happen, and settling too quickly could end up being that there's some money left on the table and stuff that you didn't know about, that maybe with some additional time and research, you could have figured out, or figured out a better strategy for yourself. So it does give you more time to plan. As much as you may want to reach a settlement very quickly, it does give you more time to plan and to be able to work things out to work with you and your family moving forward. And then, of course, working with your team. It gives you more time to work with your team. If they're doing a lot of the research and uncovering stuff, it gives them more time to make sure that it's in your best interest what that eventual agreement might be. So it's really important to take control. Again, you may not feel like you were in control of the finances before, but you need to be now. That's the sad reality, is that you may find yourself in a circumstance that you planned on, or it could be that you've just been thrown into the circumstance of going through a divorce. But it's very important to know that you are the one that needs to advocate for you, and you do need to take control of it. That one of the best ways of doing that, of course, is hiring a team and recognizing that, hey, I probably have things that I don't know. There's probably stuff here that other people could help me out with, or help me see, that I'm not going to see on my own. Not only because there's just a limited number of hours in the day, and again, going through a divorce, the rest of your life is still operating, right? You still probably have family obligations, you've got activities, you've got work, you might have a business, so you've got all that stuff still going on. And then in the meantime, it's almost like throwing in a part-time job on top of that with regard to handling the whole divorce process, the business of divorce. As callous as that might seem, there's kind of a business to divorce, right? There's an organization that needs to happen to be able to get through it intact. So it's really important that you take the time, take control of the circumstances, so you end up getting through it in the best way that you can. I'd also throw out that that's not just with regard to the finances. Taking control of it from an emotional standpoint, taking control of it from a parenting standpoint. If you don't feel like, if you feel like there's areas that you can improve in any area of your life, this might be the catalyst, right? It could be something that is really causing you to step up with regard to any of these things, with regard to health, parenting, connections, friendships, any of that stuff. Now's the time to take control of them. So with regard to that, I'm going to open it up to any questions that people might have here at the end. I've got a couple of other thoughts that I'll throw in as well as we get to that point. But So one thing that I will throw out to you as we compile any questions that are there is that there are all kinds of resources out there, but be careful what the source is, because of course online There's all kinds of messaging boards, things like that. There's a lot of misinformation that's out there as well. So with regard to preparing yourself, planning, educating yourself, just be very careful about what the source is as well, and just use a trusted source. Make sure that it's an individual, whether you're hiring professionals or you're doing some of your own research, make sure that it's from a reputable source. Also recognize that it may be from a reputable source, but it may not apply to you. There could be videos out there, YouTube videos, things like that, that say something that's very truthful, but maybe not in your state, right? Maybe it's not in your circumstance. And there's all kinds of gotchas. I can tell you with regard to anything in the financial world, certainly the legal world, there's what we think is going to happen, right? There's the details that we understand, but then it could also be things that, well, that there's this exception, right? There's this asterisk that could come into play that would mean that it doesn't apply to you, or maybe some different rule applies to you. So asking lots and lots of questions and using some resources from people who have already been there before. We also have a divorce planning guide. Feel free to reach out to us for that as well. It's a free white paper, so you can just email us. In fact, just email me directly, josh@keystonefinancial.com. My email is up there on the screen. So happy just to forward that back to you. I want to be of service in any way that I can, and certainly my team as well. We're here to support people not only in divorce circumstances, but of course any kind of circumstances that you're going through, any kind of planning that you find yourself in. It's really important to work with experts that have been there before. So I don't see any questions that have come in the queue, and I can tell you that doesn't surprise me a whole lot. We just have a few people that have dialed in today, which is great. But one thing that I will tell you is that this is being recorded, and we're going to have this out on YouTube, so you can process this link. Actually take the link this afternoon when it's up on YouTube, and you can forward it on to anybody that you think needs to see it. Maybe you've got somebody that thinks that, hey, this could be coming. Maybe they're in the middle of a divorce. Maybe it's even after the fact, and they realize, gosh, there's probably stuff that I missed. There's probably stuff that I need to educate myself on, and I need to kind of go back. And of course, there could be some decisions already made, right, that you can't undo, but there's never a point where there's not another day, right? Financially, there's always another day. There's always another opportunity to be able to do the right thing and to be able to do the smart thing for you and your finances. So with regard to that, I'm going to break for today. But again, the YouTube link is going to be up this afternoon. Certainly contact us, josh@keystonefinancial.com. Our office is here in Loveland. Keystone.com is my address, keystonefinancial.com after my name or any of our team members. So reach out to us if anything comes up that you want us to cover with you. I thank you for the time that you've invested with us today. Appreciate the trust that you put in myself and my team, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care.